Well, welcome everyone to our third virtual annual general meeting. It's actually our 15th AGM for the FLCA. We certainly debated as to whether to go back to an in-person meeting or remain virtual for this year, as the poll that we conducted earlier in the season was a very close one. But maybe next year. We're certainly thrilled this evening to have over 70 registrants at the meeting, which is a wonderful turnout and probably one of the highest that we've ever had. Our quorum in accordance with our bylaws is 10. So Jen, maybe you can confirm that we have more than 10 members present and have met our quorum.
Yes, we do. There's currently 40 attendees, and I'm quite certain that everyone is filing in, so it'll take a few minutes, but yes, we do have enough.
Perfect. Well, we'll keep going while everybody's getting on board here. First of all, I'd just like to, Jen, can you put the PowerPoint up?
Sure. Hang on.
We have to drive to Surrey.
Okay. Thank you. And we can go to the next slide of the board. I'd just like to start by introducing the members of the FLCA board. I think you know most of them. Unfortunately, Don Ferguson, our president, has been held up in Ottawa at a meeting, so he won't be able to join us tonight. But we do have with us Ross Graham, treasurer, Wendy Huck, secretary, Pat Kelso, director of membership, Doug Kirk, director and our past representative on the FOTSA board of directors, Jen Parker, director, communications and representative on the FOTSA board, Scott Dales, director, community engagement at social events, and Tom Hayes, director, environment. I don't know if she's on yet, but I'd like to welcome a special guest this evening. We will have Aisha Shande, our SSEA water scientist, who'll be doing a special presentation later on. I'd like to also welcome all those who may not be members of the FLCA that might be joining us this evening. We certainly hope that the information we'll share with you will be of some value, and you might even consider joining the FLCA afterwards. FLCA board member Jen Parker is our behind the scenes technical manager. And at this point, she'll take us through a brief Zoom 101 refresher course. Jen?
Sure. Okay, so I'm hoping that everyone's well versed in Zoom after a couple of years of having to do it, but specifically for our webinar tonight, all of the board members and a couple of extra guests are panelists, and you'll be able to see us and speak to us, and you can unmute when you need to. For all of the attendees, you're all in mute mode. And we can, during question and answers, we may be able to unmute people as well, but we do have a couple of forums for questions and chatting. So you'll notice that you'll have a question box. You can put in any questions that you have throughout the session, and then at the appropriate moments during the session, we'll answer the questions relevant to that section. I believe I was able to enable the upvote. So if you have the same question as a bunch of other people and someone has already asked it, you can click on the upvote button, which sort of puts that to the top of the question list. You can also use the chat, and you can talk to the hosts and panelists, and we can do things there, but we'd prefer to have the actual questions come to the Q&A panel, just so that we can manage them. And then if there's opportunities, we can unmute people and see how it goes. So yeah, and there will be a couple of polls that we'll be doing for voting purposes and informational ones. So when I launch a poll, it will pop up on your screen to vote, and you can just click on the option that you want to use. So, and an announcement attendee has said that the chat function is disabled. Okay, so it's just question and answers, I guess. Which is interesting. Zoom has been changing its options for webinars lately. So yeah, so back to Elizabeth, and we'll keep going on the
Okay, thanks very much, Jenna. And just in terms of the voting, one last comment. For the voting on the motions, so like the approval of the minutes and the election of the board of directors, it's just the members that would be responding to that particular poll. And then if there's another poll, we do have one other poll that we'll be asking later on. That's open to everybody. So we'll just review the agenda quickly as we have a lot to cover in the 2 hours that we've set aside for the meeting. The final agenda was distributed to members along with a copy of the minutes of the 2021 AGM and the election information back on August the 13th. So just quickly then, we have next up the approval of the 2021 AGM minutes, a report from the president, and then our membership report from Pat Kelso, our special presentation with Ashishan Day, followed by the Farlain Lake Aquatic Plant Study Report from Kelly Biaggi, the Eurasian Water Milfoil Update from Tom Hayes, social events with Scott Dales, a discussion around AED devices with myself, the financial report from Ross Graham. We have another participant with a very loud voice, sorry. The election of the board of directors, and Doug is going to take through that, and then recognition of our retiring board members. We finally will wrap up with a period of questions and answers. So whatever hasn't already been dealt with earlier on in the agenda, there'll be time for that as well, and our wrap up. So that's the agenda. First up then is the approval of the 2021 annual general meeting minutes. I'd just like to ask if there's any questions, corrections, omissions that anybody would like to raise. And if not, Wendy, can I ask you to make the motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that the minutes of the 2021 FLCA AGM be approved.
And we have Pat Kelso has agreed to second the motion. So Jen, the vote. Take a minute for that. Oh, okay.
Okay, I believe, there's still a few people answering.
Okay.
But, I think it's safe to say that the motion is passing.
Okay, well then I will keep going. So in terms of the president's report, I'm going to make it fairly brief. We certainly have lots of environmental issues and continue to be a key priority for FLCA, and there's no shortage of them, particularly this year. Aside from our ongoing management effort to control the Eurasian water milfoil, we've also had the gypsy, now LDD moth, now actually I believe it's called the sponge moth, the continued fluctuating high water level, blue-green algae now with the accompanying water advisory due to toxins. And yesterday there was a boil water advisory for those on the municipal well on the west side of the lake. And I understand that actually was apparently a system breakdown, and fortunately it's now been resolved. So the water advisory, that boil water advisory has been lifted. Based on reports from its experts in January, the meaning the SSEA, the MND, MNRF, and the Simcoe County Forests, the township decided not to implement any aerial spraying for the spring of 2022. So we continue to provide members with information regarding dealing with the moth and how to participate in private spraying through Zimmer, which did take place with 2 applications earlier in the spring during May and early June. We ran our first webinar education session back in June on the Eurasian water milfoil, and Tom Hayes will update you on that particular project. You'll recall that we've been very, very fortunate to have received a grant of close to $200,000 from the Ontario Trillium Foundation spread over a 3-year period from 2019 to 2021 inclusive. And COVID restrictions severely restricted our management efforts in 2020 when everything went into lockdown. And the OTF granted us an extension of our grant period to the end of this year, 2022. However, the impact of the pandemic continued, and with various other factors, we were restricted once again last year. The challenges continued this year, and we submitted a formal request for a second extension of our grant period. And I'm very happy to say that that request, which was submitted with the support of the township and also the SSEA, we did just receive approval. Now that means we have funds from the grant available to us for another year, and the treasurer can explain this further in his financial report. So that takes us to the end of 2023. Related to our Eurasian water milfoil work, we actually contracted with Solitude Lake Management to conduct a thorough full lake aquatic plant study in July, and Kelly Biaggi will report on that. And the final report will be available come October. Right now, it's just preliminary results. We do want to sincerely thank our Eurasian water milfoil team. Next slide, Jen. Tom Hayes, Brian and Pat Kelso, Greg Goss, Don Ferguson, Judy Buchanan, Andrew Partica, and Kelly Biaggi, who continue to wrestle with this invasive aquatic plant. And Peter Andrews, who, as we all know, continues to assist us all in the background. We continue to work with the SSEA, who provides expertise as consultant and assists us with planning, monitoring the impact of our efforts, creating a detailed mapping of the infestations using data we supply, and assisting us with education efforts. Water quality monitoring continues through the MND-MNRS Lake Partner Program and FOTSA's testing program. And we thank Kelly Biaggi for assuming the role of FLCA's citizen water scientist and conducting those tests. After struggling with poor and expensive internet services, we are now able to enjoy Bell's fiber to home service, now available all around the lake. I think the majority of people are now utilizing it, which has made a huge difference. And one area that many organizations struggle with, and we're definitely no exception, is member engagement and strategies that will help build community. Scott will talk a little bit about that more later, but we do thank Scott Dales for organizing our virtual Kids Fishing Derby once again this year. We had more participants than we did last year, and I know we can look forward again to another one next year. We certainly all need fun in our lives, and Scott has some ideas for next year to help members connect with each other. Boat wakes continues to be a concern, and while the opportunity to enjoy recreation on the lake is very important, we can't stress enough the need to be wake aware and the impact they have on the shoreline, and the safety and enjoyment of those near the shoreline or sitting on their docks, relaxing and enjoying the scenery. The provincial government has now finally passed the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, which updates legislation governing nonprofit organizations such as the FLCA, which has been incorporated since 1998. We have 3 years to review our original articles of incorporation and the bylaws to make whatever changes might be necessary to ensure compliance with the new act, called ONCA for short. Ross Graham and I will be working with James Tuck through this process and ultimately coming back to you, the members, for consultation and approval of any changes that have to be made. Communication is vital, as we all know. And although we haven't put a full newsletter out yet this season, we've been so busy with other things. We have issued a total of 26 e-alerts since February, posted regularly to our Facebook page, and responded to many, many messages through the general email box and also through Messenger. My sincere thanks to Jen Parker, who has been providing increasing assistance in all areas for communication, and she's helping the board move forward into the current century with technology. Jen has also assumed the role of FLCA's representative on the FOTSA Board of Directors. Personally, I'd like to sincerely thank the FLCA board for all its hard work. Each member of the board has a role over and above participating in board meetings, whether it's membership, communication, financial management, environmental issues, social activities, or representing the FLCA with other organizations such as FOSA. But as you'll hear later again this year, when we get to elections, sustaining the leadership needed to keep the FLCA going and growing is a huge challenge. We're sad to be losing 3 of our current board members this year. 3 people who have dedicated many, many hours to the work of the board and other projects for a period spanning over 8 years. We're very fortunate to have 2 members willing to stand for election, yay. But looking ahead to next year, there are actually 4 of us coming to the end of our term on the board. We need members to step up and take on leadership positions to bring fresh ideas, new energy, avoid burning our volunteers out, and continue to move us forward. We've come a long way as an association. We're certainly not perfect, but we continue to evolve. Membership is growing. We have new people in the community. We've built positive relationships with other important organizations and associations, and we provide a collective voice for all of you. An association is a reflection of its members, its volunteers, and its leadership. It's vitally important to use your voice. As our theme for the past few years says, it's the power of community. Let's keep the momentum going. Thank you. Now, I'd maybe, are there any questions related to the president's report at this point?
Not yet. So I
Okay.
haven't seen anything in the questions panel. So,
Right.
but you know, and everybody, if you have questions that you know are going to want to be answered, you can put them in advance. So,
Okay. Now I'd like to call on Pat Kelso to provide a report on membership. So over to you, Pat.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everyone. I see through the participants, lots of new members, lots of our regular members, and some people joining in tonight to be part of our meeting. Thanks for being here. It's nice to see you all. Let's have a quick look at our numbers and how they look this year and last year. In 2019, which actually isn't on this slide, we had 108 members. And then in 2020, 21, we had 120. And this year, at the end of the fiscal year, we're up to 121. Now, that's great because we've maintained the numbers, but we've also got a lot of new members. This year, we had 36 new members. And we always have a few people that move away and things like that. So there's always a little bit of attrition, but glad to have the new members, new ideas, new thoughts, and new people around the community. So that's how we look for this year, 121. Some people have already done their renewals, and that's great because this year already in August now we have 73 people. We're sitting at 73 members. So there are quite a few that will still need to renew for this year. And I know a lot of them even came in this week. We'll get to you. We'll get to you. I know some were coming in yesterday and today, and Elizabeth and I were noticing that, and that's wonderful. We will get to you. I must also mention Louise Hamill, who on the civic holiday weekend went around to the people on Andrew Drive and solicited or invited people or encouraged them to renew. And sometimes just that personal touch makes a difference. So that's something we can think about in the future too, making sure that you talk to your neighbors and friends to get everyone to join. Okay, let's have a look now at all the great benefits that you get from being a member. And I'll be quick because I know everyone, there's lots to read through and you're welcome to read through it. I know everyone is here to listen to our important presentations after. So, but as you know, being part of our association helps you stay informed, but also gives you a say. So if you have things to say, questions to ask, it gives you that voice. Right now, of course, we have environmental concerns such as the blue-green algae, the continuing concern about the septage field, and the ongoing, we're always concerned about water quality and quantity, and our invasive species, the Eurasian water milfoil, that we've been working on for a number of years, working very hard, as you know. Yeah, those of you who have been with us and part of our association for a number of years. So we work together, we work with you. You can help us, of course, but you do get some great benefits. You're part of FOCA and FOTSA, which are federations of other cottagers in Ontario, and you get some discounts on going to Rona. That's always a bit of a help for everyone. People are always spending money improving their cottages. There's some discounts that you get by being a member. And then we also have some social events, and I know everyone enjoys the kids fishing derby that Scott arranges for us, and we have some golf days and other things that may be coming up in the future.
Okay.
Okay, we want to move to the next slide. For anyone who hasn't renewed yet, this is just a little bit of a reminder here. You get all of those things for just $40. So it's a pretty good deal. And it's easy to renew. You can use e-transfer and add Farlain Lake as a payee, and use our inquiries at farlainlake.ca as the email address. And our security question is, what invasive weed is in our lake? And you can either answer EWM, or if your bank is very fussy and doesn't want just 3 letters, EWM can be your answer. And or if you prefer to just pay cash, you can still do that, or send in a check. So we're all responsible for membership, and hopefully everyone will talk it up with their neighbors and friends. And I also want to thank Margaret, who has stepped forward to help us out with membership. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about our nominations and our voting on the board members and that kind of thing a little bit later. But anyway, thank you very much, Margaret. Are there any questions or thoughts that anyone wants to ask now?
Doesn't seem to be just yet.
Okay, everyone wants to hear about it, the special water presentation, I'm sure.
Exactly. Jen, do we have Aisha online, do you think?
We do.
Yay. Okay.
All right. So that's next. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I'm putting the spotlight on you.
Great. So we'd very much like to introduce Aisha Shande to do a special presentation covering sort of all things related to water and the lake. Aisha is the water scientist for SSEA, and I think is certainly well known to FLCA for a number of years now. She's been with SSEA since 2005 and has a master's degree in watershed ecosystems. And her work with SSEA has focused on long-term water quality monitoring of Severn Sound, local inland lakes and rivers, along with developing several citizen science programs, one of which, of course, is our water level monitoring and ice in and out programs. She secretly enjoys looking at algae under a microscope, so the current situation on the lake should provide her with lots of enjoyment. We'll ask that you submit your questions during Aisha's presentation, as Jen said, using the chat function or the Q&A while Aisha is talking, and Jen will monitor them so we can ensure that all of the questions get answered at the end of her presentation before we move on with the rest of the meeting. So at this point, I would like to turn this over to Aisha. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I am going to turn my screen my video off just for the presentation because I'm using 2 different monitors here, and I will pop back on afterwards for questions. So I'll just get my screen shared here. And can everybody see that first slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks good. All right. So we're going to be talking today about conditions on Farlain Lake, so including the water chemistry, water quality that we've been sampling for, as well as algae conditions, and also touching on water levels. So lots to talk about today. Are you seeing the next slide? Perfect. Okay. So just briefly, for those new members, I'm going to touch on who the SSCA is and what we're up to in the Farlain Lake area for this year. Go through some characteristics of Farlain Lake that I'm sure most of you are aware of, but just to sort of set the stage for some of the conditions that we see on the lake. I'll go through what our water quality study entails this year and the results, some of the results that we have so far. And then most of the discussion will center around the current blue-green algae bloom, just some general information about algae, do's and don'ts and what to look for, and talk a little bit about water levels, and then wrap up with some things that landowners can do more specifically around the algae issue. And then, of course, open it up to questions and answers. So the Severn Sound Environmental Association, if you're not familiar, we are a watershed-based agency, a joint municipal service board. So we serve the 8 municipalities that are in the Severn Sound watershed. One thing to note about the SSCA that differentiates us from a conservation authority is we do not have a regulatory aspect to our work, with the exception of source water, municipal drinking water source protection, which is covered under the Clean Water Act. So generally our mission is to ensure environmental quality in the Severn Sound watershed, and we do that through science, collaboration, and partnerships. So in 2022, this year, in the Farlain Lake area specifically, we are doing our water quality survey, which we do every 5 years approximately. COVID kind of threw that schedule off a little bit, so our last survey was in 2016. We also have, as Elizabeth alluded to, several citizen science programs that are applicable to folks on the lake. So our water level watch program, where folks can submit observations using that water level gauge. Also ice spotters, so for folks who are around when the ice comes in and goes out, they can submit the date that that happens on. Shore watch, which sort of, folks that can, live close to the lake that can make observations, from a daily to weekly to even every 2-week period, just kind of general lake conditions, and we provide some neat monitoring tools to facilitate that. We also provide support for the Eurasian Water Milfoil Control Project in terms of technical support, which I won't speak to today. That's definitely not my area of expertise. And I know you've had some presentations by Tamara, so I'll leave any questions about that to pass along to her. So Farlain Lake, as you likely know, is it's quite small and shallow. It's considered a kettle lake. And unique in the sense that it does not have an outlet, although we think it has a shallow groundwater seepage where it drains very slowly to Second Lake or Kettles Lake up in Owenda Park. So it's primarily fed by precipitation and also groundwater inputs from the surrounding area. The watershed bedrock is limestone based, so this really shapes the type of water chemistry and water quality that we see in the lake. Around the shoreline is a mix of both permanent and seasonal residents, and as you know, there's quite a number of dwellings around the lake, with a small, sort of agricultural area in the southern part of the watershed. And we do have one municipal drinking water system, which is located on the west side. In terms of land use, this map shows the land cover of the watershed that drains into the lake. And I'll just note that the north and south sink that are shown on the map here don't connect directly to the watershed. There are low land bridges that separate it from the rest of the watershed, but there's reason to believe that they may be connected via shallow groundwater flow. So we sort of include it here just to show the land cover in the general area. So you can see that it's mostly a mixture of wooded areas, so coniferous and mixed hardwood species, with that ring of fairly densely developed shoreline area right around the lake. So in terms of our work this year on Farlain Lake, we're out there, and you may have seen us out by canoe, sampling every 2 weeks. So we started the season at the beginning of May, and we'll go right until about early October. So we're collecting water samples for water chemistry and also analysis of algae. So the species that we're finding in the algae community, as well as the amount, so sort of the density present. We also collect samples for zooplankton. So these are tiny little invertebrates that live in the water and can sort of act as a controlling factor to keep algae in check. We also measured the clarity of the water and the depth at our sampling site. And then we have instruments where we can measure temperature, conductivity, the amount of oxygen and pH, sort of from the surface all the way down to the bottom. This map here shows our sampling sites. So some of these sites are from previous studies. So the yellow circled sites down at the bottom. So FL1 is kind of our main open water location. So it's sort of in the deepest portion of the lake there. And then FL3 is a consistently flowing tributary that comes into the lake, which we sample as well.
I don't want to go.
So just as there's someone needs to mute their microphone there.
When I'm in Zoom.
Just double check that you're on mute, everyone.
I'll get the slides.
So just in terms of to sort of set the stage on trophic status of Farlain Lake, so we can, and it sort of indicates how nutrient enriched the water body is. And so there's a bunch of different indicators that we can use to sort of quantify, what range does a lake fall within. And so this can change over time. So, it remains to be seen with this year's data, kind of how things shake out. But from previous years, based on, the phosphorus, an organic form of nitrogen called total caldol nitrogen, the clarity of the water, the amount of algal biovolume in the water, all these indicators place Farlain Lake in a mesotrophic or sort of a moderately enriched category. So the hot topic for today is the algae bloom that was observed on the lake, sort of a midsummer bloom this year. And just in talking to folks from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, it's been quite a slow start to the algae bloom season, but they're starting to see it sort of ramp up in a lot of different areas across Central Ontario. So definitely not unique to Farlain Lake in that sense. So this particular bloom was observed actually by SSEA staff while we were out sampling, so just towards the end of July. So samples were collected both in the southeast and the southwest side of the lake. So these samples were analyzed both for the specific species that are present in the sample. So where there were 3 main species that were identified, all of which are forms of blue-green algae that can produce toxins. So they also conduct toxin analysis for 2 major toxin groups that can be present in the water. So one of those toxin groups, called anatoxin, was actually below the detection limit. So that's good to see that there wasn't any of that present. And the total amount of microcystin, which is the second toxin, was at that time below the recreational contact limit, but was above the drinking water limit. So that sort of prompted the health unit to put up the water quality advisory. And it's, they definitely take a cautious approach there. So as per the Ministry of Environment protocol, once a bloom has been confirmed, they generally sample, a couple of weeks later. And if toxins are detected, they'll wait until the fall to continue to resample. So the second sample that was collected August 3rd, they included a location up at the north end of the lake. And at that time, that location was clear of a bloom, so they were not detecting species that would be of concern. And toxin analysis was repeated. So for all 3 samples, toxins were present, the microcystin toxin, but it was at very low levels at that time. So one thing to note is that, when these blooms occur and start to either break up and sort of dissipate, they release their toxins, and once released, that toxin can move kind of throughout the lake. So even if you're not necessarily seeing the algae cells and colonies on the water surface, the toxin can persist for a period of time. So the pictures down here, the lower left in particular, was taken by SSCA staff and just kind of gives you a sense of what we were observing at the end of July. So sort of this, it was almost a yellowish green kind of color, so not necessarily the typical blue-green that you always see, and almost looked like a pine pollen type accumulation. And these are some of the photos that we took under the microscope. They are very interesting to look at, even though they're not what we want to see. So I won't go through this in too much detail because I'm sure most of you have seen the public health notice, but just some things to point out in particular that these toxins can be harmful to both humans and animals. So, you know, keeping your pets out of the water is important. And that for any folks who do draw lake water for any kind of household use, that boiling that water will not destroy the toxins. So the reason for that is, you know, it's not like a bacteria where you're trying to kill the bacteria and then it's no longer going to make you sick. It's actually the toxin within the cell. So once you boil the water, it releases, the cell breaks open and releases that toxin. So that's why it's important to not use any of that lake water for any kind of consumption. They also recommend, so again, that you not allow any pets or livestock to go in and drink the water or swim when the bloom is visible. And sort of that goes for human contact as well. So if you're not seeing any algae in the water, then it's quite likely that the toxin concentrations are not going to produce a harmful effect in terms of contact. Oops. Uh-oh, my computer is being a little bit slow for the moment. There we go. Okay, so I've addressed a few of these questions already, but so some things that I'm going to go through over the course of the presentation here. So we touched on swimming and use of the water for household purposes, whether toxins can affect pets. The other question that comes up is what about fish and wildlife? There is some evidence that microcystin toxin in particular can accumulate in fish. This tends to be in lakes where it's in higher concentrations, but you know it's still relatively new science and not a whole lot is known. So you know the health unit does recommend that fish are not consumed when a bloom is active. And then in terms of wildlife, you know there's no reason to think that if it affects you know humans and dogs that it wouldn't affect other animals that might be coming down and drinking the water. But again, it tends to be in higher concentrations where we might see you know more widespread die-off, for example, and that certainly hasn't been documented in our area. Boat activity is another question that has come up, and whether that can spread the bloom around. Not really. It can sort of mix the immediate waters, but really what's doing the primary mixing is the wind. So you know, especially Farlain Lake being very shallow and quite small and being oriented in the direction of the prevailing wind, that's really the primary factor in what's going to move not only algae but potentially the toxin around the lake as well. So you can sort of assume that any concentrations that are in the south end may eventually kind of work their way up to the other end of the lake. In terms of how long a bloom can take to dissipate and what happens to it afterwards, it's a bit hard to predict. You know, some of these factors are quite complex, and how algae communities interact with their environment can be hard to predict that. I know some blooms that have occurred in recent years in the area have persisted well into the fall. But it is a good sign that the toxin concentrations are starting to come down. So, you know, we may get off lucky here, and the next round of sampling may show that that things are kind of a-okay. In terms of what actually happens to the bloom and the algae, so essentially once conditions are no longer favorable for that algae growth, you know, whether it be cooler temperatures, the days are starting to get shorter, cloudy days, so they really need a lot of sun, just like any other plants. You know, the algae can start to die off, and essentially those cells are just going to sink down to the bottom of the lake. Now, a lot of species of blue-green algae have special cells kind of within the colony where they can overwinter. So it is possible now that we've seen some of these particular species this year that those special overwintering cells can hang out down in the sediment and come back next year. So it sort of remains to be seen how that's going to play out, but it's something that is possible. So some of these other questions I'm going to address in some of the upcoming slides. So why haven't we seen this particular bloom before? What might be causing these blooms, and how can we prevent it in the future? And is there any way to predict these future blooms? So I'll try to get into some of this, but I will say it is very complex lake science, and the answers are not foolproof and 100% predictable. So we kind of do the best we can with the information we have. So I won't spend too much time in some of these preamble slides, but essentially algae are just very small microscopic single-celled plants. So they can exist in various forms. So a filamentous algae that's attached onto rocks, or we might see algae suspended in the water. So that's what we call it, the phytoplankton. It's sort of living out in the middle of the lake. Or you might see it kind of growing in like a cloud type form around other plants that are growing in the lake. And some algae are actually what we call macroalgae, and they look like plants. So things like Chara, if you've ever heard of that species, is actually a type of macroalgae. And a lot of the ocean kelp and that sort of thing, seaweed, those are actually species of algae. So they can be quite complex in their forms. And as you can see by the slides here, some of them can be quite beautiful under the microscope, even being turned into forms of art. So the main issue with algae, they're a very important part of a lake ecosystem. They form the basis of the food web. And if we didn't have algae, we wouldn't have fish, and a lake would be basically a swimming pool. So they are very important, but the problem comes when there's too much of any one particular or group of species. So you can get blooms that are sort of mixed in the water, which was the case for Farlain Lake. So it wasn't necessarily a surface scum. You can sometimes get slimes that are on rocks or on ladders leading up to your dock and that sort of thing. And the issue sometimes is that decomposition of this large amount of algae can lead to depletion of oxygen down in the bottom waters. So, concerns that we hear from shoreline users definitely, can make things slippery, and the low water clarity of the water. So in terms of some of the effects that they can cause, sometimes it comes down to aesthetics and smell. It's not necessarily harmful. Some different species can actually clog, boat anchors or water filters, and impart different, tastes and smell to drinking water. So this becomes a concern for municipalities who actually draw drinking water from a lake. And then in particular, any species that can produce toxins. So these can be specific, liver-related toxins or neural toxins, or ones that affect your skin, so dermal toxins. And sometimes it's a combination of the two. So in terms of the types of algae out there, there's a whole taxonomy and thousands of different species, which are, kind of classified on different cell structures and pigments that they have in them. But for our purposes, it's useful to kind of group them based on the form that we see them growing in. So whether they're free floating and causing a surface bloom, whether it's forming a mat up on the surface of the water, or sometimes that can originate down at the lake bed. Different attached forms of algae, and then the macroalgae that I mentioned that can sometimes look like plants. And we do see some species that can actually occur in multiple forms. So they could be free floating in the water column and also forming mats, either on the surface or the lake bed. So the free floating algae is what we were observing in Farlain Lake. So again, that picture just up at the top there. And these free floating forms can take a lot of different appearances. So sometimes it's a really, really bright green kind of pea soup type look. Sometimes it will look a little bit like floating pollen, more of a yellowish color. Sometimes it'll actually look like fingernail clippings, which we've seen in Midland. It's kind of gross. So the key thing here is, if it is identified to be a blue-green bloom, that these species can produce toxins. However, the tricky thing here is that even though a particular species has the ability to produce toxins, they don't always do so. And we still don't fully understand the conditions why some species will produce toxins and sometimes they don't. You can have a really, really nasty looking bloom and it's actually not producing much at all. So that's why the toxin sampling and the algae identification always go hand in hand. But the precautionary approach here is if you do see anything that looks like that surface type bloom, especially if it has a bluey green color to it, to avoid contact with the water and avoid use of the water. And there's the phone number there that you can get in touch with Ministry of Environment to report that bloom. And you guys will all have access to this presentation after the fact. So if you don't catch any of these details, you can come back and take a look. So in terms of some of the free-floating forms that we might see also mixed within the water column. So again, this was the case for Farlain Lake. So these can be a little trickier to identify and might look still kind of greenish color, but sometimes more of a goldeny brown color. Also, it can depend on what state the bloom is actually in. If it's starting to decay and die back, it can take on that more browny color. And again, some of these forms can produce either just taste and odor compounds that are offensive in drinking water or produce actual toxins. We also have the mat forming algae, which mostly tends to be filamentous green algae and not actually toxic. So it looks a lot more dramatic because it sort of floats right up to the top and sort of has all these air bubbles and traps all kinds of other debris. It could actually harbor bacteria as well, so not something that you'd want to go, seeking out to swim in by any means. But yeah, again, not producing toxins. Although there are some species of blue-green algae that can sort of start out growing as a mat on the lake bed and then pop up to the surface. So sort of that middle picture here, it looks a bit like frog skin. And then we have different forms of attached algae, which again tend to be the filamentous green algae, as well as types of diatoms. If you've ever heard of diatomaceous earth, that's actually just dried out diatoms. So these types would be attached to rocks or other hard surfaces, and can sometimes actually form clouds around plants in the lake. So sometimes it can be very difficult to tell the difference between a blue-green algae bloom and some other natural phenomena. So for example, the pine pollen in the left-hand picture there. So we can sometimes use the color and the timing of what you're seeing as a clue, but we are starting to see blue-green blooms occurring earlier in the season than we have in the past. So timing is not always kind of a fail-safe. And some species can be a bit more yellowish. So, definitely the example on Farlain Lake. So, the only way to be really sure is through microscope analysis. So some other phenomena that we sometimes get calls about that look like blue-green algae, but are not actually. So one is called duckweed, and it's actually a very teeny tiny aquatic plant. So from a distance, it could look like, quite a spectacular blue-green bloom. But if you get it closer and actually take a look, they're these tiny little plants. So kind of going back to some of our questions and, thinking about why this is happening this year and why we haven't seen this particular occurrence in the past. So looking back to some previous information that we have about the lake, so in 1973, the Ministry of Environment did a water quality study on the lake. And so they noted that the amount of suspended algae was fairly low, but that the productivity of the lake, they felt was evident just in the widespread growth of aquatic plants. So even though they weren't seeing algae at that time, it was fairly obvious that there was enough nutrients to support quite a lot of plant growth at that time. And then we did see in 1990, there was a complaint about blue-green algae that was submitted to the ministry. It was a different species that was identified at that time. But clearly there were conditions at periods in the past that have supported this type of growth. And so you can see just in the, hopefully my mouse works here, in the mid-90s on the top graph, just the low water clarity that was associated with that bloom event. And over on the right-hand side, the amount of chlorophyll, which is a pigment found in all algae cells. So whenever that pigment concentration is high, we know that there's a lot of algae. So that's something that has occurred in the past in the lake. And then looking at Severn Sound data, so this is our algae sampling data from 2016. So this showed, if you look down at the bottom, kind of that bright blue color that's highlighted in the box here. So that's the total amount of blue-green algae that we detected in the lake at that time. So you can see that midsummer is sort of when it does tend to peak, although it didn't make up, during that year, it didn't make up the majority of all the algae biomass that was out there. So, it definitely didn't appear to be a bloom, but we know that there are blue-green algae species in the lake. And in fact, the 3 species that were identified by the ministry were all detected in our past samples, both in 2011 and 2016. So we know they're out there. Looking at, so some sampling was done by the ministry back in 1996, and then SSEA sampling in 2011 as well. And so looking at that past data, so these graphs just sort of break down the algae community by those major taxonomic classes. And we're just looking at sort of an average for the year. So looking at the top graph, 1996 had more algae than the following 2 surveys. So again, it remains to be seen what 2022 is going to look like. And we'll definitely pass along those results once they're available. So in terms of the information that we do have for 2022 to try to help us understand why this may have happened, although again, it is a very difficult thing to explain sometimes. So temperature is one key factor in blue-green algae growth in particular. So many species of blue-green algae can actually reproduce better at warmer temperatures than other algae. So they tend to sort of outcompete and dominate in those warmer conditions. So we did see, so the top graph here just showing temperature down at 1 meter. And the green line here is 2022. So we saw that at the beginning of the 2022 season was warmer than in past surveys, although the temperature did sort of level out later on. And 2011 saw much warmer temperatures than we've seen this year. So, it's not a complete smoking gun, but, it's possible that some of the early season warm temperatures may have sort of kickstarted some of that growth. Another thing that can sort of favor blue-green algae growth is low oxygen conditions down at the bottom of the lake. So what that essentially does is causes nutrients to be released from the sediments. And that sort of, feeds the algae, and then they can come up to the surface to sort of take advantage of more light conditions. But when we look at the temperature in, so this is going down with depth, so over all the different years that we've sampled, we see that there's no difference between the surface water temperature and the bottom water temperature. So essentially what this tells us is that the lake is able to mix very well, which we would expect because it's so shallow. So because of that mixing, we also don't see low oxygen at the bottom. So the oxygen story is not necessarily playing a role. However, I'll come back to the sediment and the nutrient story in a minute. And then the final graph here is just showing the kind of the water clarity. So essentially you read the 0 up at the top is the surface of the lake, and 100% is down at the bottom of the lake. So the more, more of the water column that we're seeing, we know it's very clear water. So in 2022, for example, around the time that this bloom was identified, we were only able to see about 50% down into the water. And so for a lake of this depth, we would really, if it was a low nutrient, low productivity lake, we would expect to see all the way down to the bottom. And we definitely were not seeing that. So just to sort of start to think about what role nutrients plays in this type of algae growth. So looking at the bottom graph in particular, so this is long-term phosphorus. So this is sort of an annual average for each of these sampling years, including the Lake Partner Program data. So we've had a couple of members on the lake that have been active in that program, which is great. That can really help sort of fill in the data gaps between our sampling. And so you can see that over the long term, there hasn't really been an upward or a downward trend in the amount of phosphorus. And that long-term average would actually classify the lake as nutrient poor if we were only looking at that as an indicator. So, that's interesting because we tend to associate high nutrient lakes with a lot of algae production. So it's still not a smoking gun. But there is a bit more to this phosphorus story. So, we're looking at, we do have spring phosphorus data available for this year. So looking at the top graph here, we've got our early May samples that we have results for. And those are quite low, like really low. And then comparing early spring samples to previous years, they also tend to be in that, so below the bottom dashed line here is what we would consider nutrient poor conditions. So the spring concentrations are important to look at because that's sort of the start of the season, the amount of nutrient available to algae kind of right off the bat. However, we did do a sampling study with Brock University. So this is back in 2020, just before COVID. We lucked out there. And so a bunch of field students went out onto the lake and collected not only a sediment core, which will hopefully get analyzed in future years, but also took some water samples at different depths. So they took phosphorus samples up at 0 meters, right up at the surface, 2 meters, 4 and 6 meter depth. And what they found kind of surprised me when it was interesting. So down at 6 meters, they found 60 micrograms per liter of phosphorus. And so that nutrient poor threshold would be about 10. So definitely right down at the bottom, there is a nutrient pool. And sometimes this happens under the ice, when everything's kind of settled and some of these layers can form, that you would get different concentrations right down at the bottom. So it is possible that this higher layer of phosphorus right near the lake bed could be fueling some of the algae, some of the blue-green algae species that overwinter down there. So they have access to this high nutrient sediment pool. So thinking about some of the other factors that can play into the formation of a blue-green algae bloom, definitely climatic factors. So things like water temperature, which obviously is influenced by air temperature, as well as rainfall that can sort of bring pulses of nutrients in at a specific period of time. And then another thing which you may not think of right off the bat is the ice conditions on the lake. So if you think about a growing season in your garden, the more nice, warm, sunny days you have, the better production of tomatoes, for example, you're going to get. So it's the same thing with algae, and so a longer period of ice-free days can be a contributing factor to more algae growth. So we did see in the last couple of years that the lake was ice-free for a longer period of time. And then looking at the weather conditions kind of leading up to when that bloom was observed, there was a bit of a heat wave right beforehand, and we did get, it wasn't a massive rainfall, but about 26 mils, and then a couple more smaller rain events. So, all these things can sort of accumulate and interact together to cause some of these conditions. And thinking about, climate change and what this might mean for future algae growth, it's not necessarily a good news story there. We do expect to see more growth overall with increased water temperatures. And so, we've got a long data set of water temperature in the open waters of Severn Sound. So looking at the lower end of Penicillin Harbor, the trend in water temperature is definitely upward. And so it's possible that we're going to see more blooms under these warmer conditions in the future. So again, predicting these blooms can be quite difficult, and we do have some factors that can sort of lead to the increased likelihood of those blooms. So definitely a history of excess nutrients, and if you think about some of the historical land uses around Farlain Lake, so even past land clearing, well before all the cottages were on the lake, and nutrients that may have been washed in. The legacy of having development around the lake and septic system inputs and all these sorts of things that can lead to rich, nutrient-rich sediments. So, that can definitely play a role. There are natural features that make some water bodies more prone than others. So again, shallow lakes that tend to get warm can be a bit more prone. The ice cover can definitely be a factor, and any flooding, which I know Farlain Lake has been under high water conditions. So things that can bring additional nutrients into the lake can be a factor. And then, as we talked about, the temperature role as well. So it's a bit frustrating because it can seem a little bit out of our control. But what are some of the things that we can control that might help limit the growth of some of these, particularly some of these nuisance and potentially harmful forms of algae? So, I mean, you definitely want to just think about your property and what sorts of things might be going into the lake that you could retain on your property better. So any type of waste, so maintaining your septic system is really, really important. Not using fertilizer on a lawn, so especially within that kind of 100-meter buffer zone of the shoreline. Maintaining a natural shoreline as much as possible, so we really want to minimize the amount of lawn. Rainfall can run off a lawn almost as easily as pavement. If you think about the amount of water that a tree and a bunch of plants can intercept, it's quite a lot. So we really want to get as much rainfall soaking into your property and not washing off into the lake. So, reducing runoff and any open areas of soil, preventing that soil erosion, and minimizing, any hardened surfaces on your property as much as possible. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, the boat wake. So there's actually an implication here. So not so much in, spreading blooms around, but excessive boat wakes can cause erosion at the shoreline, and any soil that comes in brings nutrients with it. So they kind of go hand in hand. So as much as possible, we want to encourage native aquatic plant growth. So not only plants out in the lake, but right along kind of that shoreline edge, which can really help with taking up nutrients. And then to kind of prevent any algae from accumulating right around your shoreline area, you want to make sure you're not impeding natural water circulation. So, by creating those L-shaped docks that can sometimes trap things that are floating around the lake. And then one thing that does come into play in various ways are invasive species in the lake. So, I know you guys are battling Eurasian water milfoil, and it's really important to make sure that doesn't get spread to other areas. But also, as far as we know, there are no zebra mussels in Farlain Lake. And if they were to come into the lake, they actually can have the effect of increasing blue-green algae growth, because they filter out the lake water, but they don't like blue-green algae, so they'll spit them out. So you end up with a sort of concentration of undesirable species. So, it's another good reason to make sure you're cleaning off your boat and any other toys that you might be bringing into the lake. So that was a ton of information. We're going to switch gears a little bit and just go over kind of what we've been seeing in terms of water levels this year. So the purple dots in the middle of the graph there are 2022 data points, and I'd like to thank any of the citizen science observers who have submitted data to us this year. It's very, very helpful. So what we've been seeing is that the water levels this year were lower for most of the season than kind of that high water period in 2019. But in recent weeks, it seems to be sort of meeting up with 2019 levels. So it's hard to predict at this point, but it's possible that those levels could persist, depending on what kind of rainfall we get throughout the rest of the year, and could persist into next year. So, again, these sorts of things sort of depend on, the amount of snowfall that we get next season and the amount of winter rainfall. So there's quite a number of factors causing the current water levels to be as high as they are. And so these include both geological factors and also climate conditions, which we've detailed in past presentations, and I'll make sure Elizabeth has those resources. So I'd like to thank, Tiny Township has been hugely supportive in the work that we've been able to do on Farlain Lake, along with our other municipal partners. And the Ministry of Environment, which we wouldn't be able to do these water quality surveys without their support with lab analysis. I've gotten tons of useful information from folks at the Farlain Lake Community Association. So we thank you all for that. And I will leave all of these links available with Elizabeth, but we have a bunch of resources, so including kind of a quick ID sheet on our website and a link to a YouTube video that goes into kind of some of the similar identification tips that I talked about today. Also, the health unit has some good information on their website about algae. And we've got some more information on sort of how you can minimize your impact through shoreline stewardship practices. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and you can follow us on various social media platforms here. And so every 2 weeks we do post updates, which get shared with Elizabeth and hopefully get out to all of you folks as well. But if you're ever looking for those and don't see them through the FLCA channels, you can get in touch with us to get those updates. And
Thank you so much, Aisha. I think a lot of information for sure. So if you're able to stay with us for a bit longer, there are quite a number of questions as we anticipated that have come in. So Jen, maybe I'll turn it over to you to manage the Q&A here.
Of course. And just everybody note that I've had, I may mush some of your questions together because they're very similar. So, because I think one of the bigger ones that several people have asked about through the various channels is swimming in the lake, and that it's been unclear whether it's okay or not. And there's been some mixed messaging, and I think everyone just wants to know if they can swim.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the reason there's mixed messaging is, because these toxins can move around, and so the ministry sampled in 3 locations, but it's possible that those locations that they sampled had low concentrations, and some of the concentrations could be higher elsewhere. So we take a very precautionary approach to this. It still does come down to kind of your personal assessment of risk. Some people are more sensitive to lower concentrations of toxin. So I wouldn't want to say it's okay to swim and then have someone, get a nasty rash, or, it can affect any folks who might have any kind of respiratory conditions. It can definitely exacerbate some of those types of things. So, I think it does come down to making an informed decision based on your personal situation. And if you do have access to well water and can wash off after swimming, that would definitely be ideal. But it's a difficult question to answer, I would say.
It is, yes.
It's definitely, we take a cautious approach, and we hope, the ministry is able to sample, as soon as possible and give us an answer as far as where things stand at the moment.
Asia, I did. I had a conversation with both Greg and the health unit again today, actually, just to try and get a bit more clarification, because we knew people would be concerned particularly about the swimming thing. And it really is, as you just said, more of a precautionary approach. The health unit did say that the levels of toxin that were in the samples that were done back on August the 3rd were definitely below the what she called the recreational standard.
For
So
sure.
certainly it's still okay for swimming, although some people with sensitive skin certainly may react. What she did suggest was that really people need to make their own assessment. And if the water looks, that sort of ugly, dark green, not very inviting, if it has that appearance, you probably want to be very cautious about swimming, and certainly very cautious about children going in the water that may ingest the water, and pets as well, who definitely may react to it. So that's about as much of a guidance as we can give people. As far as the ministry is concerned, there isn't a definite plan for resampling at this point. Greg had indicated that they were possibly going to do some resampling this week, but they're not. And I think they're really resource challenged is one problem that they're having at this point, much like everybody else. But what he did say was that really we need to continue to keep him updated. I know you send him the reports that you're doing with your sampling every other week. If we have any observations, if we're observing a bloom or certainly conditions worsening, whatever, keep him advised, send him photos. I am going to send photos that we took on Saturday when the water was looking really very green, very murky throughout most of the lake, actually, including right down to the bottom when we took the drone down. It was that pea soup sort of look. So that's about as far as we can go with the swimming advisory at this point. It was good news to hear that the toxin level was below. It's fairly low. But then, as you said, it can move around and we just don't know for sure. So that's about it, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely important to reiterate about kids and pets, and the beings that can't necessarily help swallowing the lake water. Adults and older teenagers or whatever that can maybe keep your head above water. Definitely lessens the risk. But as I said, there's
showering afterward.
Yeah.
Unless you're using lake water to shower.
Right. Can be a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay. So Nicole's notes is really, you have to take the information that we have and make your own determination about whether you want to take the risk of swimming or not.
And at your particular property,
Yeah.
because again, conditions will vary slightly.
And as we get more information, any more clarification, then we'll definitely pass that along as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go around because the questions are a little bit all over the place. I guess there was a question about whether we could get the numbers about the toxic levels in our samples. Is it published anywhere, I guess, or?
So essentially with the initial samples that were collected, so the recreational contact level, guideline is 20 micrograms per liter of microcystin. And the levels that were found on the July 27th sampling was about 5 micrograms per liter. So still, was less than that recreational limit, but the drinking water guideline or limit is 1.5. So it was over that particular limit. So the most recent round of sampling, August the 3rd, concentration were less than 1 milligram or microgram per liter. So fair bit lower.
Yeah. Okay, good. And I guess we're also being asked, when's the next sampling happening?
Right. So, I mean, I can tell you in terms of SSEA sampling, we'll be out there Tuesday next week. So, staff will definitely take a really close look at water conditions. But, like you've heard from Elizabeth, in terms of the Ministry of Environment resampling, we don't know exactly when that's going to happen at this time. So, you have to keep in mind that the ministry district for Central Ontario is quite large. And at this time of the year, they're getting calls left, right, and center. So it really just comes down to staff capacity to actually do the sampling, and then also lab capacity to analyze. In a perfect world, they'd be retesting a lot more often, but yeah, it's unfortunately just not possible.
Not a perfect
Okay.
world.
Okay, I guess we also had a question of what are the symptoms of a toxic, my tongue is not working. What are the symptoms of a toxic algae exposure?
Yes,
so people can monitor for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So very good question. And it would vary person to person, kind of depending on your sensitivity. So it might show up as some sort of rash that you couldn't really explain where it came from. Some folks do have more of an allergic reaction type response to it. And so definitely if you're noticing anything like that, any kind of respiratory issues, the recommendation is to get to a healthcare provider. And then, longer term high dose exposure, that's when you're starting to get into like the liver issues and the neurological issues. But yeah, that is quite a high dose and over an extended period of time.
Okay, I guess there's some questions about the wells and filtration and things like that, so I'll try to put them together. If you have a drilled well on the shoreline, does it pull from the same water, and is there a concern with that?
That was an interesting question that was posed actually at a webinar that I just watched recently, and it's a bit difficult to. The likely answer is no, because this bloom is relatively recent and probably hasn't moved around that much in terms of any toxins that are out there. But at this point, they're not entirely sure how these compounds might move through a groundwater system. They could get fairly tied up in the lake sediment and not really move at all. But like I said, it's a fairly new area of science, and there are still not lots of unknown things out there.
Okay, and then I guess will water filtration systems and UV sterilizing, is it effective in removing the toxins?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of UV, it's kind of similar to boiling. So it has the effect of killing cells, which would essentially release the toxins. So the only thing, or one of the main treatments that has been found to be effective is like a really good activated charcoal system, which most folks tend to not have. So it's something if you do have a water filtration system, you'd want to check with whoever installed that, the manufacturer, and see what it's capable of filtering out. But yeah, definitely check in with a water filtration specialist on that.
Okay, and then I'm gonna jump around a little bit on the questions here, but so don't make sure I get to all of them. I did have a question about the dead trees around the lake and whether that's contributing to the issues. That there's a number of dead trees on the shoreline, and is that contributing to the algae blooms?
I would say likely not, because it takes quite a long time for a tree to fully decompose and contribute all the nutrients that it would have stored in it. Really, the more likely cause is climatic conditions over the years, and this pool of nutrients that's sort of building up in the sediment over time.
Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna try to get to the sort of the lake questions and then to the next one. I guess are lilies a natural? They're a natural native plant. Are they good to prevent a bloom?
Also a very good question. You guys are awesome. So aquatic plants can often have the effect of outcompeting algae for nutrients. So we've seen that in Little Lake, where actually back in the 70s, there were quite a lot of issues with blue-green algae blooms. And then the lake sort of flip-flopped and became really plant dominated, and we really don't see a ton of algae growth out there now. It's quite clear. So, you tend to, especially in shallow lakes, you tend to see either plant dominated or algae dominated, but it's, it's not always clear cut. And, essentially if you're seeing a ton of plants, it also means that there's been nutrient enrichment at some point in the lake's history that's supporting all those plants. So, the bottom line is the more we can kind of cut off the nutrient supply to the lake, the better.
Okay.
But you're not necessarily going to see changes right away because there is this stored nutrient pool.
Okay. And then again, sort of on the line of just trying to keep things together, can we harvest the algae from the lake, and where could we put it? Well, that's a thought.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's something, that's been done in other parts of the world where, parts of China where they've had massive blooms that they've come up with ways of harvesting. The tricky thing with blue-green algae is it's quite small. So you would need, quite a fine, specialty fine mesh. And it's probably going to blow in from other parts of the lake. So you might clear your immediate shoreline, and then the next day or even within a couple hours, it's filled up again. And then, you're also possibly having the effect of filtering out beneficial things in the lake, right? Like all the zooplankton that will eat the algae. So we don't want to do that.
Okay, and I guess we're going to go to the sort of the communication, and this is maybe something that Elizabeth may, because we've got someone was asking, should flyers be sent out, and that because it's guaranteed the people on the lake aren't aware of the information, and is there going to be an all clear sent out by the association when the bloom is done? So just sort of that communication piece about making sure people are aware of what is happening.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll maybe let Elizabeth jump in here too, but I think it's not a bad idea to have some sort of flyer sent out if that's possible. And, one thing that we've kind of thought about is, for folks who might be renting a place on the lake and who aren't necessarily members of the association, don't have access to communications, how do we make sure that we let them know as well?
I know that certainly with the advisory going out, the township's required to hand deliver flyers to every property in the area, which they did do after the July 27th advisory went out. I don't think there's any plans right now for the township to do any more distribution of flyers, but certainly we'll get out the communication as best we can. I mean, obviously hand delivering flyers for us is very difficult. We don't have contact information for those people that are not members of the lake. We have been using Facebook, which we'll continue to do, to try and reach as many members of the community as possible, even if you're not a member of the FLCA. And that's really as much as we can do. And we'll get out whatever updates we can as we receive them from either the ministry or SSEA or the health unit. But the sort of line of communication around this is from SSEA, based on your water sampling that you're doing every other week, Aisha, to the ministry, and then to the township, or sorry, to the health unit, and then the health unit advises the township. We've established a line of communication now as well with the health unit, so they'll be keeping us up to date as well. And that's really about as much as we can do in terms of advising people as to where things are at.
We do our best to get it out there.
Yeah, we're volunteers too, and there's so many resources we have as well. Aisha, there was one other question that you and I had talked about as well, just out of curiosity. Did you ever find out if there was any algae in Kettle Lake or Gignac Lake?
Yeah, so I did actually talk to park staff just earlier today, and they have not seen anything on Kettles Lake. He wasn't sure about Gignac Lake, but he said, they have a pretty good relationship with the landowner over there, and he said, that he likely would have let them know if there was anything going on. And we may actually try to get over there and take a sample in Kettles Lake, just to compare the algae community there.
Okay.
But yeah, that was kind of our initial questions.
Yeah.
What's going on over
there? Yeah. And we did have a question about whether you check for toxins, but you do. So when you're doing
Yeah,
your
so
testing. So
it's not sampling that we do, but we sort of help facilitate with the
Okay.
ministry when they ask us to help collect samples.
okay, great. So I guess I'm going to sort of combine this into one big question because it is, everybody wants to know. It's the septage field. You know, is it contributing to the issue? Someone was asking whether there's testing done to see whether it's being done. Does it have an effect? And I believe there was a question that came in via Facebook, but you know, I thought it was only supposed to be around for a little bit of time, and when can we get rid of it? So it's just that basically everyone is very concerned about. I tried to put that in one big ball of
For sure.
septage.
Big ball of question.
Big ball of septage.
Yeah. That's gross. Yeah, and you know, absolutely. I know the township has been putting pressure on the ministry to get a proper treatment facility put in, and there's kind of lots of factors at play there. So it's, you know, it is something that's on their radar as well. But you know, there's just some things holding that process back, unfortunately. So, you know, all the folks around the lake that have septic systems, that septic needs to go somewhere. And, you know, that's the site that at the time was kind of what was selected. In terms of potential impact on the lake, so, you know, it is quite a distance away from the lake. You know, it doesn't sound very far, but if you think about all the soil and all the forest and trees and plants that are in between that spreading site and the lake itself, you know, it's a fair distance, and so a lot of nutrient uptake can happen over that distance. You know, and in particular, phosphorus gets quite tightly bound to sediments. So as it moves through soils and whatnot, it can get taken up that way, and then, you know, subsequently taken up by all the trees that are along that path. So it's not very likely that it's having any impact on the nutrient conditions. It's sort of more, you know, what may have happened in the past, land clearing that may have caused erosion directly into the lake, and then since that time, development around the lake itself. So, you know, that's why we really encourage folks to do those stewardship practices to keep things clean.
So I do hope that answers everyone's septage questions. If not, pose another one while we're talking about this. And I guess one person's asking, is there an easy way to get rid of the blooms, or you just wait?
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
If there was, whoever discovered it would be an extremely wealthy person.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately it is kind of a waited out situation.
Yeah. Okay. And is there a detailed map of the bloom?
That's a good question. It would take a very, very intensive sampling effort to do that type of work. And then, you know, as I mentioned with the wind mixing, it would change really hour by hour.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not something we can really do at this point. But I mean, having said that, because the prevailing wind direction is blowing it southward, we would expect more accumulation on the southwest portion of the lake. So, I mean, if we had a really big wind that pushed everything to the north, you know, a southerly wind, you know, it's kind of a matter of keeping an eye on wind direction to predict where it would be.
Okay. All right. And I guess I have sort of two-ish more questions about the algae bloom, and I think some of the other questions we may hold until a bit later because
we're
they're not
half an hour over, Jen.
Okay, so super quick. I guess the question is the cormorant birds, there's an increase in those. Could they be contributing to the problem? And apparently they were attacking people. I'm not sure we can do about that, but that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
But,
stay away from the cormorants. I mean, it's hard for me to answer that without knowing just how many birds are coming over. That's a little bit tricky.
Okay, yeah. I thought it'd be a bit tricky. And I guess the last one about this is dumping a pool and hot tub water. Would that have any effect on the blooms?
Think about that. Not necessarily on the blooms per se. Yeah, if you think about what's in that water, it's, you know, it's the chlorine chemicals which really kind of get volatilized off, and then yeah, you wouldn't expect there to be a ton of nutrients in those kind of waters.
All right. The very last question on this tonight is, if we're being told now not to swim or draw water from the lake, yet when the levels were higher, we didn't receive any notifications. I guess that's more that. So I'm not sure exactly what the context of that one is, because I think as soon as we knew about the higher levels, we did share information, but.
Yeah, and you do have to understand there's a bit of a lag in terms of, when a bloom might be observed to when it gets sampled, analyzed, and then that information goes to the health unit. They make their assessment on kind of the risk to the public, and then a posting is made. So there is a bit of a lag time between those periods. But having seen the information that you have tonight, and if you want more resources on our website, if you see something that does look suspicious, you can take those proactive steps to stay out of the water.
Okay, so I think we're gonna have to end the questions on the bloom for now to move on to the rest of our events. But thank you for all those answers, and thank you everyone for the questions. It's been very informative.
I mean, if people do come up with more questions, if we don't get a chance at the end of the meeting to get them answered, or if we don't have Aisha to help us answer them, we'll certainly fire them off to the appropriate people and get that information back out by email to people afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. I do have to run, but I'm happy to answer any questions that.
Aisha, thank you ever so much, Aisha. That was really, really helpful, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions as well.
You're welcome.
It's a tough topic.
Very much hope that everything dissipates sooner than later.
Exactly. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Good night, everyone.
Night. Okay, Jen.
Okay, we're sharing the screen again here.
Now we're going to whiz through.
Yep. All right. So
the next item on the agenda then was the results of or at least preliminary results of the aquatic plant study report, and we'll turn it over to Kelly.
Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to do a very quick overview of the results we have so far from the aquatic plant survey done this year. Next slide, please. So this year, Solitude, contract company we hired, carried out a full plant study on the lake mid-July. And this is the first time we've really done this to hire a company that's performed a thorough aquatic plant survey. And maybe something that could be done every several years just to understand what's in our lake. So just a thank you to JT and Kristen from Solitude. They're pictured there. They were the ecologists that traveled up from the States to conduct the survey. They were very lovely. Also a huge thank you to Don Ferguson, Greg Gross, and Brian Kelso for volunteering to drive the pontoon boat around all day while the surveyors worked, and that's also pictured there. So the map on the right here just shows all of the survey points we had them do, which was a total of 283, I believe. So you can see it was a full and detailed lake study. Each point was about 100 meters apart to try and get a really thorough understanding of the plants in the lake. So they were able to complete all these points in 2 days, which is amazing. And they even had additional time to go back and get more detailed information about the current Eurasian water milfoil infestations that we have. So like the exact boundaries of the infestations. The sampling method they used is very simple. It's a rake toss. You can kind of see it in that photo there. It's very simple and common, but it's actually the most accurate. And basically they just throw a rake out on a 20-foot line at each survey point. They pull it in and assess what plants were caught in the rake and their density as well. And then they were doing visual inspections as they went. Next slide, please. So here, this map shows the current presence of Eurasian water milfoil throughout the lake, which the surveyors found. So the color of the dot in the map represents the percent cover at each survey point. So red is a very dense infestation, that's 75 to 100% cover of the survey point, and green is a trace amount, so 1 to 24%. So the surveyors found four Eurasian water milfoil infestations. 2 were classified as dense. So we have the largest infestation, which is in the north end there, which you can see by the red dots. This was one of the first infestations that we noted in the lake. And then there's that other dense infestation in the mid-lake, which you can see there as well. And then there were 2 trace infestations. So those are the green points. So much less dense. And again, we see that in the middle of the lake there. And then if you look to the southwest end of the lake, right along the shore there, you can see another green point there as well. So last year, we had a total of 17 infestation sites of Eurasian water milfoil, but this plant survey detected 4 of those this year. And I'm going to comment again on this in a minute. I just wanted to give a little bit of a comparison there. Okay, so next slide, please. And my last slide here just shows a brief overview of the native species that are present throughout the lake that the surveyors found. Again, the coloring coordination is the same. So red is dense, yellow's medium, and green is least dense. But basically what they found, the most abundant species in the lake were the water nymph, which is the top left map there, as well as the Illinois pondweed, which is the map just below that. This was followed by tape grass, and then there were very, very small amounts of waterweed, coontail, white water lily, and spike grass. I was with Andrews today about these results briefly, who is very knowledgeable about the lake, and he was telling me that it looks like you know, species composition and species diversity has changed quite a bit over the years. For example, there used to be a lot of Richard's pondweed present throughout the lake, which was completely absent from this survey altogether. It also appears, based on the preliminary results, I didn't show this map, but overall species richness has gone down a little bit based on other years. So just to comment on this and the Eurasian water milfoil infestations, it seems to be that we're seeing fewer Eurasian water milfoil infestation, but also less native species as well. And because we just got the results this morning, we aren't sure why this is happening. And I'm no expert on plant ecology, but we're wondering if this has something to do with the blue-green algae outbreak, since both the invasive species, Eurasian water milfoil, and native species of plants are kind of lower than we expected. I'm sure Tom will touch on this as well. I don't by any means think that this means that Eurasian water milfoil is going away on its own due to how aggressive it is as an invasive plant, but just wanted to comment that we need to look into this a little bit more, just to understand what's going on, especially with the invasive Eurasian water milfoil. So like I said, these are very preliminary results. Solitude is giving us a full report in the fall. So we'll wait a couple months to get that from them, but just wanted to share this today based on the results from the plant survey. And that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, or I'll be around if you think of anything for later.
I don't see any questions right this second, but perhaps we could hold on the questions until after Tom's presentation, because they may all
Yeah,
go together a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I guess Tom is our next presenter, and we'll get to your slides here.
Good evening, everybody. I just have 4 quick slides. One is looking at the status. The other is our search to add options to our management toolbox, what actions we've taken this year, and then looking forward. So in terms of the status, I think, you know, it's still here. It's not going away. And I think if it's growing in size, and I say this, preparing these slides before we had the data that Kelly just presented, I think it's important to know that at the north end, it certainly appears physically to be growing in size. So that was one of the hot spots that was detected by Solitude. But one of the things that we are learning, and in discussion with other lakes affected by Eurasian water milfoil and with experts in the field, we are far better off than most lakes. And I certainly, we don't know all the factors that contribute to the growth of Eurasian water milfoil, but certainly I think the active management efforts of the Lake Association and the volunteers in the lake certainly have helped in keeping it in check the best we can. The picture here is, this is on August 1st, when I was on the boat, when we had a visit from CPRO. And this is a root ball from Eurasian water milfoil. And you can see that if we don't deal with the root ball, we're, you know, this plant is not going away in any capacity. It's significant. That was, you know, larger than the size of a softball. And so we have to find a solution that deals with the roots which spread and the plant grows. Next slide, please. So over the last 10 years, maybe even longer, we've been searching for different methods, different options on how we can manage Eurasian water milfoil. This is hand harvesting, the DASH system, which is diver-assisted suction harvesting, the use of different herbicides. And we have come to learn of a new product that we're very interested in, and it is called Procelicor. It is an aquatic herbicide for the treatment of specific plants, especially Eurasian water milfoil. This product is produced by a company called CPRO, and they have this product approved in the United States by the FDA and the environmental protection agencies. It's widely used and very effective. And right now that product is receiving favorable review from Health Canada. We understand right now that Health Canada has put forward a recommendation which opens up public comment and review, which is a public consultation is a normal process in the review of any drug or pesticide or herbicide, but it is progressing to the point where it has had a recommendation to open up public consultation, which is good. And if that is approved, then that becomes another option for us in our management of this invasive species. I got a few pictures here. On August 1st, Dr. Mark Heilman from CPRO visited the lake. You know, he's more than hands-on. He has flippers on and snorkel on, and he was in the water. He wanted to take a very close look at what we had. You know, in certain areas, you can see the density that come up with the rake toss. But again, you know, his opinion was we are far better off than a lot of lakes. And he has no doubt that if given approvals and if agreed to and approved by the the board that Procelicor will be very effective in treating this product. So actions 2022, I'll just try to make up some time here. As Kelly had presented, identification, detailed mapping, and tools were a priority for this year. There was an outside possibility that Procelicor could be used in a trial on our lake, but that was not approved by DFO. Further use of Reward, which is the diquat herbicide that we have been using, is currently under review. And at this point in time, I think we're leaning towards not using any herbicide in 2022.
Actually, Tom, I'll just jump in there. We can't use it because it would not have a very good impact on the algae situation. It could actually cause the cells to burst open and release toxins, so it would not be a good thing. So we're definitely not going to go ahead.
Anything else, Elizabeth?
No, sorry. I just
No.
wanted to, yeah.
Okay. We will use some additional mats in some high density areas as additional actions for 2022. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we did secure an extension of OTS funding, which is a great news. And last slide, please.
Okay. Oh, there's our
Yes, these are
drone.
some of the tools. We have an underwater drone and some new navigation tools. So looking forward, this will continue to be a priority for the community association. There is a dedicated committee that's focused on this, and will continue to stay engaged. We will continue our due diligence on Procelicor. And as always, we will include both options in our annual plan, which would be submitted to the different regulatory bodies, so that we have the option of both in upcoming years. And then finally, you know, the success we've had in the management is based on community support, and we would look forward to the community continuing to support us. And for the simple reason is we've got a very special lake here and want to keep it that way. So thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
So I do have a couple of questions if we have time for them. They're kind of similar, so I can ask the two as one. It's the I guess one is, will the use of the Procelicor impact the algae, positive or negative? And the associated question is that could the previous use of Reward have caused the algae bloom?
I don't have a clue. Sorry. I mean,
no,
that's the straight answer, but
yep.
I mean, obviously that question is one that is one that we will ask and investigate.
Yeah. Okay.
The last time we applied Reward, for starters, was last July, and it does dissipate. We can certainly check with SSEA as to what kind of impact that might have had on the algae bloom, but we did not apply any Reward this year. So I'm doubtful, but we'll check with SSEA on that.
Okay.
We didn't use Procelicor at all. Again, we're not scientists, so we have no idea what the impact of Procelicor could possibly be on algae.
But that would be, we could ask that question when we're moving towards it. So
yeah, we have a very, very good dialogue with Dr. Heilman, and I'm sure that he would weigh in on this.
okay, great. I don't think there's any more Eurasian water milfoil water plant questions right at the moment, so we can move on to our next part.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Jen. Thank you so much, Tom. Moving on to the sort of fun stuff, actually, we all need fun. Board member Scott Dales has taken on the role of social convener and once again this year organized the fishing derby, which again was very successful with increased participation. So Scott has also been very good about towing orphan rafts and docks and just jumps in wherever he needs to with his watercraft. So many thanks to Scott for doing that. Scott, would you like to go ahead and talk about the fishing derby and some other thoughts that you have?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I am off mute, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. First year, decided we wanted to do something in the lake because everybody was sort of closed in. So we come up with a fishing derby, asked around to a few local sponsors, and they all said, sure, what can we do? So again, we went back this year to the same sponsors, increased from 26 kids, I think, last year to 45 registers this year. There were some bigger fish caught, not as many, I don't think. The weather was kind of cold and windy and rough, but there's a lot of persistence out there, a lot of good pictures. The kids seem to have a lot of fun. We got a lot of feedback from them, a lot of creative stories and hats. So, and our sponsors came through huge with prizes, which definitely put some smiles on the kids' faces when they saw what they got. Because, you know, it's a small lake, and I think they expect, you know, if you get a handshake and maybe a McDonald's gift card, you're doing good. But our sponsors come through huge. We got fishing rods, tackle boxes, shirts, hats, gift cards, checks for winners, like money. So our sponsors, Charlebois, North Simcoe Electric, Keith's Fish Fry, Kyle from Axe and Wedge, who actually grew up on the lake. Kyla Bavala, Century 21. And Mike jumped on board this year from North Simcoe Science, and he provided all the tape measures for us and the little stickers. And going forward next year, we want to use the winners from this year and actually put their pictures on the tape measures for next year. So a little something extra for the winners. And we do see that there's a lot of good fish still in this lake, even with all the doom and gloom we've been talking about. And being a catch and release, we know they're still there for next year. So we'll go forward with it again next year. I believe the date will be on July 1st. Just happens to fall right on Canada Day on Saturday. One of our sponsors requests is they love giving the prizes, but they really like to see the kids. So weather permitting and everything else in the world going on, we would like to have a barbecue next year to present our prizes so our sponsors can be there and actually give out the prizes. That was one of the requests this year. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out, but I think we're going to proceed that way next year. One of our sponsors had, in the past, said they would fund the barbecue. So we're going to see if they'll still hold up to that next year. Some of the other things we got going on that are not kid related. The Georgian Legacy based in Penetang. We have a code for them. If you go online at www.landmarkcruises.com, there is a 10% discount for afternoon cruises and then the fall colors cruise. So we can post the discount code on the website for you guys to use if you're curious, and we'll continue to push to continue that into next year for a full season use. Unfortunately, we didn't get this till just recently. So again, we're trying to come up with new stuff to give the members something to do outside of just being around the lake, which isn't a bad thing. Also, we tried going forward this year with a golfing day out. Partially my fault. Booking it on the Saturday of Father's Day weekend wasn't a good idea. So this next year we're going forward. I'm going to look at Ore Lake for June 10th and then Bomb Beach for September 16th. It's not a tournament. It's just a relaxing day out. A bunch of guys come out to have a good time, or guys and girls. Sorry, don't mean to leave anybody out. Just a good group. And whoever wants to come out, the registration will be a couple weeks prior because I have to give the golf courses 2 weeks notice. So hopefully we can get some people out, meet some new people. Like Elizabeth said, we have a lot of new people around the lake. maybe to meet some other people. I know I've met a lot of people towing docks around the lake and stuff. So that'll be going to next year. And that's unfortunately pretty much it for so far this year. If anybody has any ideas, I'm open to looking into stuff. I'm open into researching if we can get discounts other places beyond what we get from the tiny lake as far as recreational activities. So going forward next year, fishing derby, a couple golf days out, the Georgian Legacy cruises, and the barbecue, hopefully, at the kids fishing derby. So
Okay.
that's pretty much it.
Sorry.
Okay.
I spun my mouse. I was
That's
going to
okay.
say some people have been putting some suggestions in the chat, so we can take a look at those as well.
Yep,
looking
not a
forward.
problem. I'm more than open to listening.
Certainly, if anybody comes up with any more ideas for Scott, just fire them into the inquiries at email, and we'll make sure Scott gets them. So thanks so much, Scott. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Okay. The was there one more, Jen, before that?
I don't think so. Let me just, sorry about that.
There was the AED
Oh,
device.
Yeah, the AED. There we go. Sorry, my mouse really did spin through all of them.
Yeah, we'll try and whiz through
Yeah.
through this one quickly. We just wanted to talk to you about another topic that has come up recently and has certainly come up periodically in the past, but it's being addressed more and more by various organizations, and that's automated electronic defibrillators, otherwise known as AEDs. What happened was back in the spring, a group of property owners on Andrew Drive there, including my family, got together and purchased an AED, which has now been installed at 86 Andrew Drive next to the public right-of-way. And that's the middle photo there. One of the group who had had a lot of experience with these devices, and in fact had been involved in a couple of incidents, did a very thorough job of researching the various suppliers and managed the whole purchase process. As you can see in the photos, it's been installed on the wall of sort of a hut on the driveway of that property next to the right-of-way. So it's out of the elements for the most part, but certainly easily accessible when it's needed. So there's no door on that little hut there. It's temperature sensitive, so it can be outside for 3 seasons of the year, and it'll be moved inside for the winter. The case is not locked. The package that we purchased did include a 2-hour, what we call a shock on the dock training session. So we held it in the right of way instead of on the dock there. And that included a refresher on CPR techniques as well as using the device. So one of our group is designated as the sort of manager responsible for monitoring the device monthly and also checking the battery condition and the supplies, and also dealing with any kind of follow-up should there be an actual incident. If the case itself, which is the white case there you see on the wall of the hut, is not locked, so it is accessible. An alarm does go off if the case is open, and it's a very loud alarm. We also have a bullhorn that's kept next to that case. So if there is, unfortunately, an incident, whoever goes to the case to get it will also blow the horn. So that would be a call for assistance from the other local members there on the street. The cost of the package, which included the accessories and also the training session, was about $3,000. And that worked out to about $350 for each of the families participating. Now, just because they're not participating certainly doesn't mean there's any limit to who can use the device. It's there for the community. And we do get a fair bit of traffic coming down that right of way to access the lake. We also have quite a number of people around our property there who are permanent residents or who are renting out their properties on an ongoing basis. So there's a fair number of people in the area. So this experience has been a little bit of a pilot for the lake, and the board has been discussing some options as to whether or not or how we might want to move forward. Our instructor did indicate to us that there's more and more communities that are going the route that we did, where sort of local groups of property owners are getting together and purchasing a device in their area. Or do we want to pursue purchasing devices from FLCA for the community? Or we start with maybe just one device at the boat launch area and possibly the north end of the lake, the two larger sort of public access points to the lake. Or do we just simply leave it up to the local community members to maybe look at what we did on Andrew Drive and use that as a bit of a model? So what we wanted to do tonight, just to get an indication of the level of interest, was just a really quick poll, which I'll ask Jen to pull up if you have them, Jen.
I do. Let's see, and here's the poll questions.
There we go.
Yeah. I will be launching the poll. Please note that answer C, where it says this would be dependent on community contributions and fundraising, did not fit on the actual poll. So just add that in your mind when you're doing the launch, your choices. So you should have the poll available now.
If you could just see which is of the most interest to you as we go forward.
Yeah.
And this will just give us a chance to talk about it further at the board level.
So just let it go for just another moment while we're and I'll share the results at the end.
Okay, so maybe while Jen's monitoring that, we'll go on to the financial report. So I'll ask Ross Graham to provide his. Oh, you need to put the
I think
slide up.
it's slowed down. So
Okay.
I'll end the poll because about 40 people have answered. So or close to. And share the results here. So
multiple.
It's split. So we'll see. And I'm sure there's some people that could be interested in any of the above options. We probably shouldn't have given that as an option. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. So
Thanks, everybody.
Now to Ross.
And so Ross, you're on.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good evening. We have finished the year in, I think, in a very positive situation. Next slide, please. We track our finances in three buckets. The Eurasian Water Milfoil Fund, which was the fund we started in 2013. And we operated with until the end of 2018, when we then moved forward with Ontario Trillium funding. But what you'll see here is, as of today, we have almost $27,000 in that fund, most of it in a GIC, and that is money that we will have available to use once we have completed use of our Ontario Trillium funding. Secondly, we operate with an operations bucket, which is principally funded by memberships and covers the two major expenses in that area are insurance and any of our system costs that we use to operate the association. And the good news about that is at this time, excuse me, we're up to about just under $11,000, and that's a very positive position. In the past, we were way back, we had almost no money in that fund, and we probably will need some of that money to fund the activities around the ONCA update, where we have to update a lot of our regulations. Finally, the Ontario Trillium Foundation grant, which we keep separate and we've been operating with over the last number of years. To date, we've received from Trillium $173,800, and on the money that we have that we weren't utilizing and invested, we have about another $700 of interest income, and that's why it's over $174,000. We have The balance at this moment in time is about $23,000 left. We will receive about another $26,000 from OTF. We have not heard yet when we will receive that funding because, as was mentioned several times, under the original agreement, we would have had to completely expend all of the funds by the end of this year, but we asked OTF to grant us a deferral to next year. So now, by the end of 2023, we have to complete our expenditures of the OTF funding and supply them with a report of how we've utilized all the funding. So that's sort of my update. The good news, I said, across all three buckets, we sit in a very favorable position at this time. Next slide, please. One of the things we have to file annual reports of the government. And one of the things is that we put forward this motion to the members every year that they approve that we don't have to do an audit when the annual revenues exceed $100,000. Generally, we won't, but we just want to put that motion forward to the members. So I believe you put it forward for a vote. So please provide your response.
Do keep in mind it should be members only that are voting. That are
Sorry,
current
Jen.
members.
Sorry, Jen, we do have a second for that motion
Oh,
as
sorry.
well. Herb Huck.
Yes, I second the
people know.
motion. We do not require an audit unless the revenue exceeds $100,000.
Right. Okay,
So
go
yeah.
ahead and vote.
So far it's 100% yes, so I think it's going to get carried. So
passed.
it passed.
Thank you.
So-
Resolution carried.
We can continue.
Thanks, Ross. Next one. Next motion, Ross.
Yes, next slide, please.
There we go.
I put forward the motion that the finance report be accepted by the members.
Is there a seconder?
Is there a second? Pete Andrews is second.
Oh, I don't know if Pete can talk. I'd have to find him and unmute him.
If he can't, I will second that if Pete can.
Okay, thank you, because it will take longer to find him. Okay, so I will launch the poll on that one. And again, this is members only voting, and it's a landslide so far of 100% voting yes. So
Motion's carried.
motion is carried.
Thank you so much, Ross.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Just sharing the results for a second. Okay.
And moving on to our election, I will pass the floor on to Doug Kirk.
Good evening, everyone.
Whoops, we can see the top of your head, Doug. There you go.
Okay. All right. As long as you can hear me, that's the main thing.
There we go.
Good. The last item of business is tonight. Tonight's meeting is the election of directors. Before I get into the process, I just want to say how important the board is to the association. Basically, the work of the association throughout the year is performed by the board and the volunteer committees that you've seen. Their work, the EWM committee particularly, a little earlier in the presentation. So participation and renewal of the board, in my view, is critical to the ongoing viability of the association. With respect to this year's election, no nominations were received in response to the call for nominations that went out at the beginning of August with the notice of the AGM. However, 2 members of the association have agreed to stand for election to the board for a 3-year term. Those are Jerry Pipe and Margaret Brome. So I'll speak to their history in a bit, but the continuing directors, these are directors which are partway through their 3-year terms, are on the screen. Elizabeth President, Scott Dales, Tom Hayes, Wendy Huck, and Jeanette Parker. In addition, Ross Graham is concluded his allotted term, but has remained on the board year by year as his input and management of the OTF grant and the financials are crucial to the association. And Ross has agreed to stand for an additional extended 1-year term. And our proposed new directors are Jerry Pipe and Margaret Bohm. Jerry has spent much of his life around the lake in the summers, from his early childhood to currently. The family have been owners on the lake for 37 years. Both his family and his sisters have their families and have a little bit of a pipe enclave down at on the southeast part of the lake. And Margaret has been involved in the association in the past and was on the board a few years back, but has now become a full-time resident and has been a cottage owner for 29 years. So both these folks are passionate about the lake, and it's just delightful that they're stepping up to continue the work of the association. Without going on too long about this, I put the motion before the membership to re-elect Ross Graham for an extension of 1 year, and to elect Jerry Pipe and Margaret Bohm for a 3-year term to the board of the Farlain Lake Community Association. Can I have a seconder, please? And could you take the poll?
And I've lost my notes, I believe. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I'll launch the poll. And
Tammy's second.
Thank you very much, Tammy.
all right, so let's see.
Well,
I think, yeah, we're getting an average of 32-ish people voting, so I'd say it's 100%. There we go.
Thank you very much. Just thank you very much for that. Thank you, Jan. I will mention, and I think Elizabeth has mentioned before, that we're still seeking members to step forward. And crucial, as mentioned here, Ross Graham is staying on for 1 more year, but someone who has financial experience would be a great addition to the board. If someone could step forward in this year while Ross is on and get a little bit of a training and familiarization with the financial operations of the association, would be a real win, and step up to the board at any time, but particularly by the end of next year at the next AGM. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Doug. Jen, sorry, there was another slide there. It got missed in my script.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There you go.
So congratulations go to Jerry and to Margaret Bohm. Thank you so much. And welcome to the FLCA Board of Directors. What I wanted to do before we get into Q&A is to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the 3 retiring board members. Jen, if you can go to the next slide.
Yep.
First of all, Don Ferguson, our vice president, has just been invaluable in his role as vice president. He's filled in wherever needed with all the work that we've been doing, and particularly for the Eurasian Water Milfoil project. He's brought his skills and expertise to that project and to many other things as well. He's certainly hosted events. He's been a tremendous support. So unfortunately, he's not with us, but we do have a frame certificate that will make sure that that we get to Don for presentation. It's a little difficult to do that on Zoom. Next slide, please, Jen. And then we have our membership director. Pat Kelso has been involved on the board certainly for over 8 years. It feels like forever. She's done a tremendous job with membership. But not only that, she has certainly been a key member of the Eurasian Water Milfoil Committee as well. And again, like all the other board members, has just jumped in and helped wherever necessary. And she always has that wonderful bright smile that you see on this photo here. So Pat, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all of your help. You are going to be definitely missed on the board, but we know where to find you. And we'll make sure that we get you your certificate as well. And the next slide, Jen. And finally, last but certainly not least, Doug Kirk, who has been our director on the board. I think now, Doug, you did finish 3 years, but before that, Doug was a past president of the association, involved for a number of years before that.
I think about 8 years, Elizabeth.
Was it 8?
So in total, it's about 11 or 12. I think.
I thought it was up around there. Long time. But not only has Doug been on the FLCA board of directors, he has also been our first, and I think for 10 of those years, Doug, representative on the FOTSA board.
I think it's 8.
Is it 8? Okay,
8.
get my numbers right. But has certainly not only been the FLCA representative on the FOTSA board, but he has also served as the vice president of FOTSA. So thank you ever so much, Doug. It's been great working with you. Doug certainly brings a very clear and analytical approach to all of our discussions, which has been extremely helpful. And you too will be really sincerely missed, Doug. So a very, very heartfelt thank you for everything that you've done as a volunteer and as a board member for FLCA.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Much appreciated. It was time well spent, and we won't go away. We'll be around.
Yeah, like Pat, we know where to find you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth. And it's it's been a great team to work with for sure. And I know you're in good hands with the new ones as well, with Jerry and Margaret coming on. But I will definitely be around.
For sure. So again, thank you to all 3 of our board members, and a big thanks to the entire board, including those that are continuing on. Look forward to another exciting year for FLCA. Maybe a few little less environmental issues would be really good. But Jen, maybe we'll just go back and check back on the Q&A quickly.
Yep, we can do that, definitely. We'll just get to the Q&A slide. I'm just going to stop I'll leave this showing. Okay, so there are a number of questions. I'm going to do them in no particular order. And I may merge a couple of questions because they're very similar. So I guess, one of the questions that was repeated a couple of times was boat wakes. They're an issue, and what can we do about them? It seems to be stirring up the lake, and can that have an effect on spreading the algae toxins around and all of that sort of together? So
I'm not sure how quickly to answer that when it's a really difficult one. Certainly what we've been trying to do is share the information about the impact of boat wakes, and particularly the wakeboarding boats. It's a real balancing act, because we know people certainly, as I mentioned before, want to enjoy the lake, but have to also be respectful of those that are not using those boats. I know that some research has shown that with the way the wake boats function, they do pull up and stir up the sediment on the bottom of the lake, and that's not really helpful, certainly for the spread of the Eurasian water milfoil, never mind the algae. Trying to limit or restrict any kind of vehicle or watercraft on the lake is extremely difficult. Everything needs to go through Transport Canada, and there's a very long and complicated process by which you need to go through in order to get anything done. So it's difficult. Ongoing education getting people to understand the impact that they're having on the shoreline, the people on the shoreline, the bottom of the lake, and what that means to things like the Eurasian water milfoil and possibly the algae has really been our focus and certainly will continue to be. I know that's probably not the answer you want to hear, but if anybody else would like to add anything? No? Maybe another question, Jen? Did we lose Jen?
No, my microphone just was off. Sorry. I was talking. I don't normally end up being muted, done my meetings. So anyway, question about it's around communication, I guess, with the algae levels or algae. And apparently the backline cottages did not get notified when the flyer campaign from the municipality. And, you know, there's also questions about why we weren't notified in 1996 about the algae blooms.
And that one I saw, I
and
could not tell you with 1996. I have no idea.
and yeah, I mean, we don't know what, I mean, communication wasn't as digital, and we don't know what the township was doing as far as communication then, but again, I think, and I guess with this current algae bloom, I guess their protocol is to get to the people that are on the lake, but perhaps we should suggest that they share that with the other cottages as well, because people do use the lake, so maybe we can make that suggestion to Tiny. We can suggest. So all right, so let's see. Next one, I guess, you know, it's just talking, you know, what can people do about noise and light levels around the lake? Because I mean, it's, you know, we can, you know, because there's apparent issues with people having lights on, unnecessary lights on all of the time year round, and I guess to find the noise pollution question. I guess it was around the southeast or west end of the lake. There's a lot of noise, I guess.
What, I'm not sure what kind of noise.
And I'm just looking for the question here. So there's a lot. Pollution, noise pollution and traffic, especially on the hill by Andrew Drive. So maybe if the people can, traffic noise. So
We have a lot of people around the lake, so I have no idea how you would control traffic. But maybe just going back to the light pollution, that's definitely an issue. I think there's a lack of awareness as to the impact of lights being left on all night, aside from the impact on people and the annoyance that may create. It's the impact on wildlife as well at night, which is very negative. And so certainly raising the awareness, education. We can't certainly get into neighborhood battles. That's not our role, but the education and information certainly is something we can get out there again. We have done that before with light pollution. Any other board members, please jump in here.
I mean, I think education is really the way to go. Because, you know, we can't force people to turn their lights off, but we can let people know what the impacts are.
Yeah, I mean, noise is something, there are bylaws that are related to noise, but traffic noise with people coming down the hill on from Military to Andrew Drive there, I have no idea how you could possibly control that. Speeding is another question, which we've certainly talked about before. It's a major issue.
I would think that, you know, with the speeding and that, you know, that continually contacting the township about it, because I mean, they're really the ones that would do something about it. So, you know,
Yeah, just saw a question pop up there, Marilyn. I
Yes.
don't think we're suggesting that light pollution is more of an issue than traffic noise. It's just,
Mhm.
I'm not sure how you address the traffic issue.
Yeah.
Yes, they did install speed bumps at the bottom of Military and decided that that was not something they wanted to proceed with, and they installed the electronic sign instead. That was a township decision.
So, yeah, and let's see what else we got here. And again, there was other questions about off-leash dogs and people being not cleaning up after their dogs. And again, it's education and
It's awareness.
it's
and
hard-
we
yeah,
have
it's
we
awareness.
certainly put
Yeah.
that in our newsletter before.
Mhm. Yeah,
People,
but-
some people think that because they're not in the city, maybe they don't need to pick up.
So-
Definitely do need to pick after pets, and it's just a consideration for other pet owners and other people for sure. And pets definitely need to be kept on a leash. That is a bylaw. Or kept in within a secured area.
Mhm, yeah, and I mean, I think it's awareness and courtesy for your neighbor and community, and all that it's living in a community and being aware of the other people around you.
And respectful, yeah.
It's so we can do some educational materials on it, but I don't know, we can't force people to be kind neighbors, unfortunately. We would like to, but and so another question we have here is the pothole, what can be done about potholes around the lake? And again, I think that's reporting them to the township for repair.
Yeah,
'cause
that's definitely contacting the Public Works
Yeah.
Department at the township for sure.
Yeah. I'm just losing track of the questions. Oh, sorry. My mouse spins a lot. So and I guess there's sort of a couple of questions like, swimming in the middle of the lake, again, that's without a boat, which is again, an education piece. But there was a question earlier about short-term rentals and bringing their boats from all over the place. And I think, I would think it's again, educating our residents to educate the short-term renters. And I mean, just educating our residents, because I'm sure there's some people that are unawares about bringing in boats from other places and not washing them off first and those sorts of things. So I
Right.
guess it's really awareness, education, considering your neighbors.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a neighborly chat conversation as well with your neighbors and some of these issues. Certainly as far as the rentals are concerned, definitely that's been a concern of ours as to what information gets shared by the property owners with their renters. The township has a renter's guide on their website. We have a renter's guide as well on our website, which actually we will need to be updating given the changes for short-term rentals that are being made. But it is important for the property owners to share as much information about the lake and sort of best practices around boating, especially if they're bringing in their boats from other areas. They need to be washed off. We do not have washing facilities at the boat launch. That's not something that we're able to do. Not a formal boat launch. It is a place in a parkette to launch your boat, but it's not a formal boat launch, and we don't have a water supply there as well. And I think certainly if we rinse off boats there, then it's likely to go back into the lake. So that's a bit of an issue as well.
I think I've covered most of the questions. There's a lot of chat, so which is good, but at the same time I might have missed something in here. So if I've missed something, please speak up. And yeah.
I think it's, at this point, Jen, probably it's 9:30.
Yeah.
And those of you who have stayed on, thank you so much for persisting here and taking the extra time to stay with us. But thank you for our third adventure in this world of virtual meetings. We do hope we might be able to do an in-person meeting next year. There are certainly advantages to doing that in terms of making connections with each other in a personally, possibly even a combination of online as well as in person. But we look forward to seeing you all at the lake. We will take a look at the chats and the questions and answers and see what we can possibly get out there in terms of answers and more information, more education, etc. So your input is very much appreciated. And I'd like to call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Have a great night. I will end the meeting now. Thank you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night,
Good night.
everybody.
Hi, everyone. Good night.
All right.